This is a Genesis G90, a luxury sedan from Hyundai's new Genesis luxury brand, which was recently created to rival Lexus and Mercedes-Benz and BMW and Acura and Cadillac. The Genesis G90 is the flagship model of the brand. This one has a sticker price of over $71,000, and some of these can get as high as $75,000. Yeah, that's right. This is a $75,000 Hyundai. If you haven't heard of the Genesis brand, you aren't alone. Hyundai has screwed up the launch of this brand to an absurd degree. First, they asked the dealers to build expensive new showrooms, promising excellent, popular products. Then, in a market that demands SUVs and crossovers, in a market where SUVs and crossovers are flying off the shelves, Hyundai launched the Genesis brand with 3 luxury sedans that look far too similar. There's the G70 and the G80, and then there's this, the G90. Apparently, this was some attempt to copy what Lexus did when it launched in the early 1990s, and Hyundai didn't realize that maybe the market has changed a little bit in the last 30 years. Also not helping things is the fact that the Hyundai Genesis used to be a model, and now Genesis is a separate brand, which has only created confusion. So far, the launch of the Genesis brand has been a dud. But that doesn't mean the car is a dud. So today I've borrowed this G90 from a viewer near Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm going to take you on a tour of it, show you all of the interesting quirks and cool features of a $75,000 Hyundai luxury sedan. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the G90, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of used luxury cars that are currently listed for sale on AutoTrader that are cheaper than you might expect. Now I'm going to start under the hood. Now, being the flagship model, the G90 has some serious power, and there are 2 different engine options. You can get a twin-turbo V6 with 365 horsepower or a 5-liter V8 with 420 horsepower. This car has the V6. Now you can also get all or rear-wheel drive. This car has all-wheel drive, which Genesis has named H-Track. I guess Hyundai Track, I don't really know. I also don't really understand why everybody has to name their all-wheel drive systems. Quattro, X-Drive, 4MATIC. Can't we just call it all-wheel drive? One thing I really like under the hood is the little warning label reminding you not to touch hot things. It says, "Do not touch. Metal parts can be hot." And then there's a picture of someone touching a hot metal part, and it says, "hot," just to really drive the point home. Now, that warning label provides some important information, and so do the headlights, which say on them full LED. Not just LED, but full LED. So if you ever get into an argument with someone in the luxury car club about whether your Genesis has full LED headlights, you just bring them out, have them look at your headlights, and you can prove to them. And it's the same story in back. The brake lights also say full LED on them, just to drive home the point that you're not some loser with partial LED lights. And in keeping with the theme of Genesis spelling everything out for you, the mirrors are auto-dimming, just like they are in a lot of cars, but they say auto-dim on them. Again, presumably so that you can win an argument if you're ever challenged to prove that your mirrors are auto-dimming. The mirrors also do another cool thing. If you walk up to the car at night and unlock the door, the mirror projects an image of the Genesis logo onto the ground. That's a really cool touch. Believe it or not, a lot of cars are projecting images like that from their mirrors onto the ground these days, but that's always a cool little quirk when I see it. Another interesting place the Genesis logo appears is on the key. Now, having the car brand's logo on the key is not all that unusual. The unusual thing is, take a close look, and Genesis is actually printed there in the smallest font I think I've ever seen in any automotive related thing. It's so tiny, but they got it on there, and it looks kind of nice. Also interesting on the key, take a look, there's a little label and it says, "Please remove this label." Well, I most certainly will not. You're just a label. You can't tell me what to do. Another interesting place the Genesis logo appears is the door sills. Open up the door and you can see it says Genesis. It's just like a normal door sill, except it's in the shape of the little wing logo, and that is kind of a cool little touch, assuming that you notice it, which of course most people probably won't. Next up is starting to climb into the car. This car has normal doors. You just close them and open them just like any other car, but there is one cool feature about the doors. If you don't manage to close them all the way, they will automatically latch themselves for you. You primarily see this feature on really high-end cars. Bentley's, the most expensive Mercedes, and now here it is on Genesis. All right, now I'm inside the G90, and I'm going to start this tour by showing you some of the cool luxury features this car has that your car doesn't. And then I'll move on to some of the weirdnesses. But starting with the luxury stuff, everything in this interior is just really nice. There are no blank switches anywhere in this interior reminding you that you didn't buy an option. Everything feels nice to push. It's nice to press. Everything looks really good. Just look at this interior. It's gorgeous. I also like the fact that they thought of some really cool little details. For example, several of the buttons have little dots along the bottom so that you know which button you're pressing without having to take your eyes off the road. For example, take a look at the infotainment controls. The button for home has the little dots on it, while the buttons next to it for back and menu, they don't. That way you can just sort of feel around and feel which button you're pressing without having to actually look down at it. That's a really good idea. In fact, you look around this interior at all these nice buttons and switches, and you're struck by the fact that even the button for the hazard lights is nice. It feels nice to push. It looks good. And when it's on, it blinks like a lot of hazard light buttons do, but it just looks really nice. You don't see a lot of luxury hazard light switches. Another thing you don't see a lot of, how about the fact that even the grab handles in this car are leather wrapped and stitched? In every other car, they're just plastic. You're either just going to grab them, not notice them, or stick a coat hanger on them with some laundry. It's just really impressive. It's little things like that that distinguish cars like this from, well, lesser cars. Another one of those little details, this car has a heated steering wheel. A lot of cars have a heated steering wheel. This one has a two-stage heated steering wheel. You want your heated steering wheel on low? That's fine. You want it on high? You can do that too. It's not just on or off like it is in, well, even a Range Rover. Another cool quirk, right above the interior rearview mirror in this car, you have some LED reading lights. And when you push the button to turn those lights on, they don't just turn on immediately and startle you. Instead, they turn on gradually, like a luxurious experience. That's pretty common in luxury cars, but check this out. The little button you push to turn on those lights has a little light inside of it to let you know that the light is on, and that light is also gradual. So the little tiny light inside the button to turn on the gradual luxurious lights is itself gradual and luxurious. That is the kind of detail you only get from an automaker who has thought of everything. And speaking of thinking of everything, we have to talk about the seat controls, which are crazy. They're on the side of the seat, and it's not just move it forward or back. You can do basically everything. You can move the seat forward, backward, you move the backrest. You can also move the headrest up and down and forward and back, and there's a control even just to move the very top portion of the backrest. And then, of course, there's something that you can do to extend the little thigh support on the bottom of the seats. This is a luxury car seat. For more proof of just how much better this car is than yours, I turn to the power folding mirrors. A lot of cars have power folding mirrors. You press a button, they fold. You press another one, they unfold. This car has those two buttons, but it also has a third option. You can just leave it in the middle, and then it's on auto. And then the car will decide when to fold and unfold the mirrors. And auto has a little light inside of it to let you know that it's on auto, so you can rest assured that your mirrors are taken care of by Genesis. One other crazy luxury car detail in this car, there's a little graphic in the gauge cluster that lets you know if you've left your door open, any of the doors. That's pretty obvious. It also has a sensor for the trunk. Just about every car has that, but check this out. That same graphic can let you know if you've left a window down. The window turns red when you turn off the car if you've left one down, and you can see it when the door is open. It even lights up that window in red to let you know that it's down. How many times have you accidentally left a window down, or has a passenger left a window down without you realizing it? Now the car lets you know. Now, there are also a couple of other interesting features inside the G90 that aren't quite as luxurious and more just sort of weird. For example, how about the sound it makes when you turn it off? I'm not even going to try to explain this one, just listen to it. Now, you can turn that sound off, but why would you? It's so pleasant. And watch it again when the sound is just finishing. The Genesis badge is just fading away in the gauge cluster. They've timed it beautifully. And since we're talking gauge cluster graphics, I also like the startup graphic when you turn on the G90. Watch this. It sort of traces the outline of the car, and then there's a beacon in front for the headlights, and then the whole car appears. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to symbolize, but it lets me know I'm in something nice. another interesting quirk, take a look at the window switches on the driver's side. Here I am playing with them. They're totally normal. Now here's the window switch on the passenger side. It's twice as large as every other window switch in every other car. In fact, the parking brake release in this car is smaller than the window switch on the front passenger side. I'm not really sure why it's a double wide window switch, but well, it is. Next up, another weird one. Now, most G90 owners will never notice this, but if you look really closely on the passenger side of the dashboard, imprinted in the leather, it says DVD. Well, it turns out if you open up the glove box and then sort of tap the roof of the glove box right where it says DVD, a little DVD slot will come down. I guess this is for the navigation disc or some other service, but either way, it's there, and that little DVD in the dashboard lets you know it's there. This is very strange. Never seen this before? Probably won't again. And speaking of the glove box, here's a cool quirk. Using a little button over to the left of the steering wheel, you can open up the trunk in this car. That is pretty normal with all luxury cars have that. But another cool thing about this one is, though, you can press that button again, hold it down, and it will close the trunk. Not all luxury cars have that. A lot of automakers are scared to have a power closing trunk in case someone or something you can't see is back there could damage the trunk or cause injury, but you can do it in the G90 unless you open up the glove box. There is a little hidden on-off switch for the trunk. If you push it, it locks the trunk so that button no longer can open or close the trunk, and whoever's sitting in the driver's seat can no longer get back there. I guess this is for the valets. So if you're a valet, someone comes up to your valet stand in a Genesis G90 and you can't open the trunk, now you know all you got to do, open the glove box, press that little button, and then you can just kind of check out what they got back there. And another odd one before I move on to the weird tech in this car, how about the fact that right above the climate controls is a passenger seat belt reminder. If you're in the passenger seat and you buckle your belt, it turns white. If your belt is unbuckled, it turns red. I guess to let you know that the airbag is on or off, but of course, no one will ever know that that's there. No one will ever look at that, and no one will ever see that it changes color except for me and now all of you. Next up, moving on to some of the interesting tech in the G90, I'm going to start in the center screen, the gauge cluster, with the heads-up display. This car has a heads-up display. It projects vital information onto the windshield. This heads-up display is more configurable than most of them, however. For example, you can change the color of the speedometer display. I'm not really sure why you'd want to, but if you prefer green instead of white to let you know what your speed is, well, you can do that. You can choose orange as well. You can also raise and lower the heads-up display. That's pretty common. This car also gives you the ability to rotate the heads-up display in case you like to look at your heads-up display sort of like this. Not really sure why anyone would want to do that. You can also adjust the brightness to a substantial degree. Another interestingly configurable item inside the gauge cluster is the fact that you can use that gauge cluster screen to change the ambient light color inside the car. Basically the color that you see coming out of the doors and the dashboard when you're driving along at night. Now, that's not all that unusual. A lot of cars give you the opportunity to change those colors, but every other car just sort of shows you what color you can have. In this car, they've named the colors. Would you like, for instance, Aurora Purple? Or how about Ocean Blue or Sunrise Red? Why would they go to the trouble of naming the interior ambient lighting colors? Do they think you're going to brag to your passenger? Oh yeah, I got Sunrise Red going on right now. Also interesting, you can control the ambient interior lighting brightness, and it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead, it's level 1, level 2, level 3, etc. So basically, you could say, yeah, I got a level 3 Sunrise Red going on. Yeah, I got a level 4 Ocean Blue. It seems a little bit too involved for ambient lighting interior color changes. But my favorite thing inside that gauge cluster screen is the fact that you can change the service intervals. Look at that. You go in there and you can adjust the service intervals yourself so the car can tell you when you need to go in for service. You can make it 50,000 miles if you want. I wonder if that would hold up with the warranty department. Well, I changed the service interval. I don't know why the engine blew. Obviously, I've seen a lot of cars where you can reset the service reminder inside the gauge cluster, but I've never seen one where you can actually change how many miles you have to drive between services. I think I would rather let the professionals handle that. Next, we move on to the infotainment system. I'm going to show you some of the more unusual items, starting with the settings. If you go into the navigation system settings, go into route options, and you can tell the car to avoid ferries, avoid tolls, avoid U-turns, unpaved roads. You can also tell it to avoid tunnels. Who are all these people who want to avoid tunnels? If you don't want to go in a tunnel, maybe you should seek an alternate activity aside from driving. Just a thought. Also unusual is this odd GPS information page. It shows your latitude and longitude down to the exact degree, minute, second, and it shows your real-time elevation. There's even this little sending and receiving graphic I'm not really sure about, but this is the kind of thing I feel like pilots use before they get on the intercom and tell the passengers where they're going. Next up, moving on to the audio settings. Like in a lot of cars, you can adjust where you want the sound, back, front, whatever, but check out that cool graphic when you move it around. It's like the part of the car that you're giving the sound is lighting up in order to receive it. A lot of cars have this feature, but that graphic looks a lot cooler than the graphic in other cars with it. Also unusual in the audio settings, if you go into Quantum Logic Surround, you're given two options, both of which are weird. The first option says Audience Mode, provides an intimate concert experience where the boundaries of the vehicle seem to disappear. Yeah. Sure they do. Then there's On Stage Mode, which is just as ridiculous. A surround sound experience that puts listeners on stage with their favorite artists, placing individual instruments and musical elements throughout the cabin. Yeah, I have no doubt that's true. I feel like I'm on stage with Ginny Eat World when I just press that little dot in my infotainment screen instead of one of the other dots. Also cool is changing the time. Now, when you change the time in the infotainment system, the little analog clock adjusts to the new setting automatically, sort of by an unseen hand. It doesn't just change the time in the infotainment system depending on which time zone you tell it you're in. So as you go through the different time zones, the little clock adjusts each time you select a new one. Interesting, in the climate information tab are the options for the smart ventilation and the active CO2 monitor. Smart ventilation says when humidity levels inside the vehicle increase while climate control is turned off, air is automatically expelled to maintain a comfortable environment. The CO2 monitor says controlling the CO2 concentration improves the freshness within the vehicle. Now, why would anyone ever turn those things off? Who doesn't want a comfortable environment and freshness within the vehicle? I'm not even sure why they're selectable, but, well, they are. And next up, moving on to the rear seats. Now, don't let the pricing fool you. Even though this thing is priced like a mid-size luxury sedan, it is sized like a full-size luxury sedan, like the size of an S-Class or an A8. And that means the rear seat is the place you want to be. Now, it may not look like that, but drop this giant center console, and all of a sudden, you have, well, a lot of controls for a lot of different things. Now, some of it is fairly standard rear seat luxury car stuff. For instance, you got two cup holders back here. Well, of course you do. You also have heated seats back here, also pretty standard. The rear passengers also have their own zone for the climate control. So when you're sitting back here, you can turn the airflow up if you want more air. You can turn the temperature colder or warmer, depending on what would make you feel most comfortable. Of course, you also have a series of climate vents. I count 4 total, 2 for each rear passenger. There's also a rear sunshade back here. You push this little button in the middle, and then the sunshade in back just whirs up to keep the sun out and also to give you a little bit more privacy. Those features are all pretty standard in full-size luxury sedans like this car, but this car has a few things that you don't get in a typical luxury sedan. For instance, the rear passenger back here has an entire group of controls on this rear console devoted to controlling the front infotainment system. Now, the rear passenger can't change the navigation system and the directions, but you can control anything related to the stereo and the sound and the radio. You can switch from AM to FM to XM. You can switch to media if you want to play an iPod or a phone or Spotify. You can do that all from back here. Now, the weird thing is there's no screen back here to do it. So if you want to start playing around with the stereo, if you're sitting in back, you gotta look at the front screen. So you kind of sit here and you do one of these in order to see exactly what you're changing. Another hilarious thing, if the rear passenger gets sick of the front seat occupants enjoying the infotainment screen, the rear passenger can turn off the front infotainment screen, and then nobody gets to use it. Now, of course, the front passengers have the ability to lock out the rear passengers so they can't make any changes, but if you're driving around in this car and you're chauffeuring someone, maybe they want to change the music, now they can. How many times have you gotten in an Uber and wished you could have changed whatever was playing on the radio? If only your Uber had a Genesis G90, that would actually be a possibility. The other cool thing in the back of this car is the side window sunshades. A lot of luxury cars have them. This car has them power operated. If the window is up, you pull up again on the power window button, and then the sunshades whir into place. And there's even a power sunshade for the tiny little rear quarter window that also whirs into place. When all the sunshades are in place, you really have a excellent privacy back here, and you're shielded from the sun, so you don't have to look at anyone or anything as you're being chauffeured down the road. A couple of other interesting quirks of the rear seat in this car. I really like the fact that if you look at those stereo controls I was talking about earlier, FM is the one in the very middle. It's sort of the king of all the stereo controls. It sits above AM and XM on its throne, and it's also the only silver button and the only one with those little dots on the bottom. In the world of the Genesis G90 rear seat entertainment controls, FM is the tyrant. Also interesting is the fact that you can adjust, if you're sitting in the rear, the front passenger seat. Press a little button here and you can move the front passenger seat forward or backwards. You can also move the backrest forward or backwards in order to give you more legroom. You obviously can't do that with the driver's seat because you could annoy the driver and then they would crash the car while they're yelling at you. Now it's cool to show you the controls, but allow me to demonstrate exactly how much this works. I am now moving the front seat forward and forward and forward and forward, and look how far up it goes. I'm pretty tall, and with the seat all the way up, I can lie down back here and still have room to spare. It's ridiculous and luxurious. And finally, moving along to the trunk, there's something particularly interesting about the trunk in this car. It is rather large, but then again, that's no surprise given that this is a full-size luxury sedan. A couple of unique things in the trunk of this one, however. You can see that the owner of this one still has his Genesis first aid kit in its original pouch, and if you dig underneath the trunk carpeting, you will see the wheel locks still in their unopened original pouch. So you could probably sell those things for like 50 bucks on eBay. Something to think about if you have a Genesis, you want to make a little extra cash. And so those are the quirks and features of the G90, aside from the quirk of hailing from a new car brand that no one's really heard of yet. Now it's time to get this thing out on the road and see how a $75,000 Hyundai luxury sedan drives. All right, driving the G90. I'm in a neighborhood here, so I'm going pretty slowly. It is a nice, quiet ride so far. I've got my heated steering wheel on 2, but if that gets too hot for me, maybe I turn it to 1. Man, it's very quiet in here. I'm finding that the ride quality is not quite on the level of the S-Class or the really highest end luxury sedans. However, it's surprisingly quiet, tremendously so. It's probably quiet above its price range, and I think the ride quality is probably about what I'd expect given its price range. It sort of rides more like an E-Class or something like that, but it's certainly more quiet than all the E-Classes I've been in. All right, here we go. Launching it now. Ooh, wow. Man, it gets up and goes. It's pretty quick. I mean, it's interesting. It has 365 horsepower, so it's no surprise that it's pretty quick. The surprise to me is that the V8 only has 420 horsepower. I don't really see a big benefit of the V8, having not driven it, of course, but I don't really see a big benefit of the V8. Surely you're going to lose a lot in fuel economy. All right, now I'm driving along with traffic here, hands off the wheel. The little steering light has turned green, so I assume that means it's going to keep me in my lane, and indeed, it's kind of shifting back over as the car drifts a little bit here or there. That's what a luxury sedan does. Oh, it's ding. It says, oh, I gotta put my hands back on the steering wheel. All right. Seat is very comfortable. Feels very nice. This headrest especially. It's like a pillow. It does have that big car feeling, though, that the S-Class also has. Although it's a quick vehicle, it definitely doesn't feel like it has some hidden secret tightness. Yeah, it feels quick. I mean, it feels reasonably fast. The transmission clearly dulls the acceleration. The transmission is clearly tuned for comfort, and it's very comfortable. When the transmission shifts, you don't feel it at all. However, you can tell that, and then it's sort of, it's not like immediate shifts like in a dual clutch car, but that's, this is a full-size luxury sedan. It's not a sports car, and that's kind of the point. Here's my take on this. Having spent the whole day with this car, but now just driving it for a few minutes, it seems like it's about 90% of the way to an S-Class. It has all the tech features. It has a very beautiful interior. Everything feels so comfortable. 90% of the ride comfort, 90% of the quietness, but you're paying 60% of the price. And so this car is a huge, huge value proposition. However, you have to then decide how much the brand name factors in. If there were no car brand, you'd obviously purchase this. The question is, how much is Mercedes-Benz more valuable to you than an upstart luxury brand from Hyundai? I talked to an S-Class owner about this car before I went and drove it, and he was like, I wouldn't get one of those. And I think that kind of sums up the general feeling, is that like this is for people who are sort of, yeah, I want to try a full-size luxury sedan, but maybe I don't want to spend $120 on an S-Class. And this gives you the feel of a full-size luxury sedan. I don't think Hyundai's going to get any buyers away from Mercedes-Benz, but I think they could get some people who are kind of coming up from lesser cars, maybe a really nice Accord or an Acura, and they're saying, I want to have my first full-size luxury sedan. And then they look at the S-Class and see that it's $120,000, and they're like, I don't want to spend that. And so that's the Genesis G90, the flagship luxury sedan from Hyundai's new Genesis brand. It's an excellent luxury car. The Genesis brand is off to a slow start, but Hyundai's smart, they'll figure it out, and this car is proof that they can do it. And now it's time to give it a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the G90 certainly isn't ugly, but I think the look is a bit conservative and it could stand out a bit more. It gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds, even with the V6 giving it a 5 out of 10 on the Doug scored acceleration scale. Handling is fine, exactly what you'd expect from a full-size luxury sedan, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Cool factor is acceptable, but this is no wild sports car, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Finally, importance is okay, although I think this one will really be determined in the long term when we see how successful the Genesis brand becomes and how important this car is to the brand. The original Lexus LS 400 would be very important, but its closest rival, the original Infiniti Q45, well, not so much. For now, it gets a 5 out of 10, bringing the total weekend score to 24 out of 50, low, but tied with the Volvo XC90 Excellence and the Volkswagen Phaeton W12, right above the Lincoln Navigator in the luxury car corner. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The G90 is loaded with nearly everything a modern car could have, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Comfort is very good, though a little behind the very best luxury cars, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Quality is high, though materials aren't quite up to the very best from top rivals, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is decent. 15.7 cubic feet of cargo space should give it a 4, but a huge back seat and decent fuel economy increases that to a 5 out of 10. Finally, there's value, and this one totally depends on your brand perception. There will be people who say they'd never spend this kind of money for a Hyundai, and people who say there's no reason to ever get an S-Class again when this thing exists for so much cheaper. Personally, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I think the price is reasonable, and I'm impressed that a car in this class could have Hyundai's long warranty and run on regular grade fuel, two things no Mercedes will ever do. Added up, and the total daily score is 37 out of 50, which is very good. That places it near the very top. Add it all up, and the Doug score is 61 out of 100, which is good for a car like the G90. It doesn't quite reach the Porsche Panamera Turbo, which is sportier, or the Lincoln Navigator, which is more practical, but it's a great score for a luxury sedan, and I have a few more luxury sedan reviews coming, so we'll see how it stands up to some strong rivals.